just remember all God's promises, and then I triumph in His prayers. As a child of God, I inherit the kingdom of my fathers, good pleasures. I inherit the power of the quiet mind. Yes, as a child of God, I know who I am today. My courage will always stay within me. God's love is never hard to find. Sometimes the darkness seems to block the light, and we feel separate and alone. If outside circumstances put you there, just look inside and claim your own. As a child of God, as a child of God, your value is definite. You're loved by the infinite. Your soul has the power to express God's grace. As a child of God. You inherit no weakness, you inherit no defect, you inherit the beauty that reflects God's face. Sally and Adrian.
Thank you, Thomas and Sally. In case there was any doubt, Sally did write that song. That is her song. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So just because I know there were some concerns online, I'm hoping that the podium mic is picking up okay for both people here in the sanctuary and those online. For those that don't know me, my name is Ed Trout. I use he, him pronouns. I am pleased to be your speaker here today. I want to start with a question, and I'm guessing I will get a mixed response, but when I talk about the name Mary Caroline Page, who knows that name? Mary Caroline Page. Because that was the birth name of the woman that we know better as Myrtle Fillmore. Yes. Her given name was Mary. She changed it to Myrtle. So Myrtle Fillmore, for those that are newer to Unity, is one of Unity's co-founders. She and her husband, Charles, founded Unity over 100 years ago, well over 100 years ago. And she has a lovely story. I love the fact that she sort of led Charles into this. We think of Myrtle as sort of being the heart of Unity, and Charles was a little more the intellectual drive of Unity, but they both had both of those qualities. So Myrtle, she grew up in a fairly strict and conservative Methodist family. After she had spent a year at Oberlin College, she started teaching. She was a teacher in Missouri. I love that back in those days, a teacher could start teaching after 1 year. For all of my teacher friends, I am so sorry, because it's ongoing education these days, which is wonderful. But yes, after 1 year, she started teaching. And she then moved to Texas, where she continued teaching. That's where she met Charles Fillmore. Now, they both had some health things that were going on. Myrtle her family actually had a history of tuberculosis, and she was in the early stages of tuberculosis. Charles had had a leg that was injured in his youth, and so it was stunted and weakened. And Myrtle had been trying all kinds of traditional Orthodox medicinal approaches to her tuberculosis to no effect. She had attended a series of lectures by E.B. Weeks. He was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins, and these New Thought speakers. This was a time when New Thought was really starting to surge. And in E.B. Weeks' talks, she learned about the ability of her mind to do so much to help her. And through that, she was able to find healing. And Charles at first was fairly skeptical, but then he started applying the same principles, and he realized through that, that weakened, stunted leg was able to strengthen, and he regained better use of it. And so then they became these devout proponents of this practical form of spirituality, practical view of Christianity, and they resolved themselves to teach this, to make this a way of life. And they began in 1889 to publish a magazine. At that point, it was called Modern Thought. And of course, New Thought is the broad term for this movement. A few years later, they changed the name of the magazine to Unity. And then in 1897, 100 years off if I say 1897, Myrtle published an article in that magazine that was called How I Found Health. And I want to read it's an excerpt from it, so it's a little edited down. You can find the entire article to read on your own. I always recommend going back to original sources. Go look at those things. But here in a shortened version is what she said. I was very sick. I had all the ills of mind and body that I could bear. Medicine and doctors had ceased to give me relief, and I was in despair until I found practical Christianity. I affirmed my beliefs, and I was healed. I did most of the healing myself because I wanted the understanding for future use, and this is how I made what I call my discovery. I was thinking about life. Life is everywhere, in animals and in people, but life has to be guided by intelligence in making all forms. The same law works in my own body. Life is simply a form of energy, and it has to be guided and directed in a person's body by his or her intelligence. How do we communicate intelligence? By thinking and talking, of course. Then it flashed upon me that I might talk to my life in every part of my body and have it do just what I wanted. I began to teach my body and got marvelous results. I went to all the life centers in my body and spoke words of truth to them, words of strength and power. I asked for their forgiveness for the foolish, ignorant course that I had pursued in the past when I had condemned them and called them weak, inefficient, and diseased. I also saw that I was using the life of the Father in thinking thoughts and speaking words, and I became very watchful as to what I thought and what I said. I did not let any worried or anxious thoughts into my mind, and I stopped speaking gossipy, frivolous, petulant, angry words. I let a little prayer go up every hour that Christ would be with me and help me to think and speak only kind, loving, true words. I want everybody to know about this beautiful true law and to use it. It is not a new discovery, but when you use it and get the fruits of health and harmony, it will seem new to you and you will feel that it is your own discovery. There's so much in here. And I love the last part of that, which is to apply it yourself and make it your own discovery. We constantly, not every week necessarily, but say from up here, we're just giving you information and tools. Apply these things. Sometimes it works a little differently for different people in different lives. Find what works for you. So apply this and see how it works in your life, see how it shows up. Today's daily word, praying for others, aligns very much with this, right? When I'm praying for others, praying for myself, aligning those thoughts. I love that in the daily word it says, whatever I am asked to pray about, my responsibility is always the same, to recognize all qualities of God are active. Even in the most challenging circumstances, I remain steadfast, affirming this truth. God is everywhere present, always. But Myrtle also goes on in later writings to remind us that the words in the prayers, thoughts and prayers, are not enough. In her book of healing letters, she talks about prayer, and she says directly, it is not enough to pray. Prayer is one step that you take, but you need other steps. You need to think of God, the all-powerful healer, as being already within you, in every part of your mind and heart and body. To keep one's attentions and prayers in the spiritual realm of mind without letting them work out into the soul's expression and into the actual physical doing of that which corresponds to what the mind and heart has thought and spoken and prayed is to court trouble. We need to harmonize our thinking and our prayers with the actual living experience. Unity has 5 basic principles. The 5th one being knowing all of this, and praying, aligning is great, but it's not enough. It has to be put into action, and that is exactly what Myrtle is saying here. We have to align our lives with that divine mind that we are aligning with, finding that health of body, mind, spirit. And it's not the easiest thing, right? We all have those struggles. You have this beautiful focus. Hopefully on a Sunday morning, you get some lovely focus in here. And then you step out into the world. And the world sometimes smacks us upside the head and makes us want to forget what we know. So we have to start walking our talk. Charles and Myrtle, again, for those that are not familiar, they had this revelation and they started living this way, and they started becoming vegetarians. They ate vegetarian because they saw that as a way of living this truth. For them, that was a way of making an active physical choice in the world that aligned those things. So it's not just the thoughts, not just the prayers. I'm actually taking these actions to heal me as well. We often do that in the form of our medical professionals too, right? I am all for divine healing and spiritual healing, but if you're sick, you can go see a doctor. They're there for a reason. They know things, right? So you use all of those tools. You align yourself with that health. In Unity, we have denials and affirmations that we use a lot. And I always want to be very clear when we talk about denials. Psychologically, when you think of denials, that's not a healthy thing. That means that you're looking at a truth and your brain just goes, nope, don't see it. It's not a reality. That is a psychological barrier and is not a way to address problems. In Unity, what the denial is to go, oh, this is the situation before me. Okay. It doesn't define me. It doesn't control me. It doesn't mean that I have to believe what most people would believe about that. You get a diagnosis that is a troubling diagnosis, maybe you go get a second or a third opinion. Great. If they all align, suddenly you're going, oh, I have all of these diagnoses that say this bad thing. Okay, that's not who I am. This is just the reality of what they seem to be seeing in their tests, which may or may not directly affect me. We've all had health experiences, life experiences with other people's health, where people defy the odds, amazingly defy the odds. And it starts usually with that alignment. It is hard to defy those odds if you suddenly get that diagnosis and go, okay, well, I guess I've got 3 weeks to live. Versus, okay, I see what you're saying. I'm not buying into the fact that you're going to tell me when it's done, right? There's so much more that goes on. And that mindset and the actions that we put into place all play into that. For those that know my background, for the last 35 years has been in theatrical improvisation and teaching those skills. And there's a mantra in improv of yes and, right? The yes means I'm not going to argue the reality you've tried to create. I see it. I go, oh yeah, I see what you're creating. My and is everything. The and is what I do with it. The and is the choice that I make. That's everything. So This was going to be the primary thrust of this talk when it was conceived of a few weeks back. That personal health, that personal mindset. And it's still absolutely the core of this talk. However, I feel it has to go farther. These last few weeks have brought up so much communal pain in the city, in the world. I have to say, when I had first heard of the shooting of the 16-year-old Ralph Yarl, my heart just went. For anybody that is not familiar, for those of you that maybe very sanely do not watch any news, there was a 16-year-old man, Kansas City, who was going to pick up his siblings and simply ended up at the wrong house, had the wrong place, rang the wrong doorbell, and was shot. The older gentleman inside presumably felt threatened, albeit the older man inside was white, Ralph was black. Assumptions were made, but generally somebody that's trying to break in or hurt you doesn't ring your doorbell first, right? Now, as far as I know, Ralph is doing okay. He's out of the hospital, he's recovering. But it's just all of this. And every day we hear about shootings, we hear about all of these things going on every day. And again, if you're not tuning into those, more power to you. Because of the work I do, I have to remain abreast of things in the world. And it can be very difficult, it can be very challenging. We don't heal the world by ignoring it. We don't have that denial where oh, that didn't really happen. You know, no, it did. It did. I can't go in and change every single person, right? Who can I change? Me. I change me. And by changing me, I can help others. By healing me, I can help others to heal. There's the saying that hurt people, healed people heal people. And you don't have to be fully healed, by the way. If you're working on healing yourself, you can still help heal other people. But if you're sitting in your hurt, if you're ignoring the situation, if you're not willing to address it, you're not going to heal yourself or anybody else. And we have a world that is in so much pain and needs so much healing. Our society, our country, our world needs healing. We are the ones to do it. We are the ones who can see it, and we are the ones that can make a choice in our lives to make that change. Again, for those that don't know, just a few years back, this community lost our beloved Angela Summers, a postal worker, simply out doing her job, and she was shot on somebody's front porch. Senseless, right? Senseless. And yet, being who we are, I know so many of us also looked at, I believe he was 20, 21 years old, that young man that shot her, and also say, but what must his life be like that he feels like that is an option, perhaps the only option? How do we get to the place where people feel like, oh, my option is to threaten somebody or shoot somebody, and that's all I can do? We get there by not working to heal, by simply looking at all the problems and going, well, there's nothing I can do. And we've all been there, right? There's overwhelm. And I get it. There's a lot of burnout. You hear bad news day after day, and you do eventually just start going, well, it's just another shooting. It's just another bad thing. There's a story of a jungle that had a lightning strike. And the jungle caught fire. All the animals stampeded, crawled, flew to safety, ended up by the edge of a lake. There was a little hummingbird that went down, sucked up a tiny bit of water that it could fit in its beak, flew all the way back to the fire, spit it out, came back, filled back up again, goes back, spits out that little few drops of water, comes back, fills up again. Finally, the other animal's like, what are you doing? You cannot put out that fire. And the hummingbird said, I'm doing everything I can. Don't give up. We align ourselves in heart and mind and spirit with what we know is the truth, and we have to take action. The Quakers have their saying, pray, then move your feet. There's a lot of praying going on, not a lot of feet moving going on. Pray, then move your feet. Many of you are aware too, the board had a retreat yesterday. And it was a lovely time. I wasn't there for the beginning, but I was there for a large chunk of it. One of the things that they did was to work on conflict resolution. And they did these basic evaluations of what style of conflict resolution they might have, or what styles. Generally speaking, we all carry lots of styles of conflict resolution, and different styles show up in different circumstances. Those styles are being collaborative, where, hey, here's a problem, how can we solve this problem together, right? Which is a lovely approach. There's also the competitive style, where I know what's right and I'm going to force it on you. It's effective, it gets things done quickly, not always the best option if that person does not have the actual best solution. Compromise, which sometimes gets a bad rap, right? This country was built on a lot of compromise. That's not what's wrong with it, but I will say. Compromise in conflict resolution basically means, we can all give up something in order to get the more important things, right? And again, not a bad style. There's accommodation, which is sort of the opposite of the competing style. I'm not going to force my way. In fact, my needs don't matter, so you just have your way. Because I don't want there to be a problem, so you have your way. Again, it can get things done, but it's not necessarily the most effective. And finally, avoidance. A lot of people in this community have this as a very strong aspect. Because we love people, we want to get along. We don't want there to be conflict, and so we avoid it. Avoidance doesn't stop conflict. Avoidance delays the resolution and usually makes the impact bigger by the time we resolve it. So avoiding, there is a healthy aspect to avoidance though. If you are in the middle of something and you are so emotional you know you cannot deal with it without being angry, at that point saying, I need to give some time to give some perspective, that is a healthy application of avoidance, right? That's one of the few healthy applications. The rest are just ignoring the issues. So these were all things that came up, honestly, for me in my last weekend of seminary. And as we were talking through all this stuff in class, our instructors also brought up the aspect of greed, which confused me at first when they were talking about greed. And it shouldn't have, because intellectually, once they explained what they were talking about, I knew it. I knew it intellectually. So greed and conflict resolution. Sometimes in conflicts, there are parties typically outside of the conflict who benefit from the conflict. Perhaps they are getting prestige, perhaps they are getting power, often they're getting money. They have no vested interest in stopping the conflict. Their interest is in keeping the conflict going. We see that in this community, in this country, in this world. I don't need to name examples. I'm sure you can think of some. Seeing that, as I said, this is something I knew intellectually, and yet I tend to pull back from it, and I don't always look at it. And when there's an ongoing conflict, when there's something, it's been going on for years, why can't we solve this? There's probably a reason. Who is benefiting from that conflict, and why are they continuing it? A couple more things. When we're looking to resolve these conflicts, it's not just some approach where it's like, well, this makes sense, right? It can make logical sense, and yet from an emotional standpoint, people are going to react, and that's often where we pull people in. When you've got two sides, and again, I don't want to bring up specific political things, but you can think of your own, right? There are big, strong divides in political views. One side's arguing we need to abolish this, the other's saying we need to protect this, the same thing. And often we talk about logical arguments and forget the emotional side, or we talk about the emotional side but forget the emotions of the other side. There's an approach to to life, to intellect. Wise Mind, it's called Wise Mind. It was developed by, what is her name? Marsha Linehan. Marsha Linehan developed this, deriving it from Eastern philosophies and wisdom. But it basically looks at, you've got your intellectual mind here, you've got your emotional mind here. Where do they overlap? That is your wise mind, right? So my body knows I need to eat something in order to stay alive. My emotions go, oh, give me potato chips and sour cream, and yes, all the fatty, salty foods, yes. But in between that, I can find that thing that still kind of tastes good, satisfies that craving, and nourishes me. That's wise mind. It's that middle part of the diagram. That's what we're looking for when we are moving forward. How do we speak to mind and intellect? How do we do that for ourselves? Heal that in ourselves. Resolve that balance between intellect and mind. When you go back and look at Myrtle Fillmore, she looked at her logical side. I'm a child of God. That affirmation of hers. I'm a child of God, therefore I do not inherit sickness. For her, logically, if God created everything and God is everywhere present, I am a child of God. That is pure logic. I don't like being sick. If I'm a child of God, I don't need this. In between that is, I have the aspect of health in everything. That's a very wise mind. Find your wise mind. And again, it will shift a little bit person to person, community to community, but find your wise mind. I want to leave with one more story and then just some closing. Because I told Michael, it's like, I really don't have a lot of notes for today, which means it's either going to be really short or really long. I don't know. There was a law lecture, first law lecture of the class year, and the professor entered the lecture hall, looked around, and he said, you, there in the 8th row, can you tell me your name? And she said, my name is Sandra. The professor says, please leave my lecture hall. I don't want to see you in my lecture. Everybody drops silent. So Sandra's irritated, but gathers up her stuff. The professor says, faster, please. She doesn't dare say anything back. She gathers her stuff and leaves. The professor keeps looking around. Everybody is just sitting there, silent and scared. The professor asks, why are there laws? Everybody looks around. So he repeats, what are laws for? Somebody says, social order. Another person says, to protect a person's personal rights. Third person says, so that you can rely on the state. But the professor's not happy with any of those answers. Finally, somebody says, justice. The professor smiles. Thank you very much. Did I behave unfairly toward your classmate just now? Everybody nods. He agrees. Indeed, I did. Why didn't anyone protest? Why didn't any of you try to stop me? Why didn't you want to prevent this injustice? Nobody answers. What you just learned, you wouldn't have understood in 1,000 hours of lectures, he said, if you had not lived it. You didn't say anything just because you weren't affected yourself. This attitude speaks against you and against life. You think as long as it doesn't concern you, it's none of your business. I'm telling you, if you don't say anything today and don't talk about injustice, then one day you too will be experiencing injustice and no one will stand before you. Justice lives through us all. We have to fight for it. In life and at work, we often live next to each other instead of with each other. We console ourselves that the problem of others are not any of our business. We go home and are glad that we are spared. But it's also about standing up for others. Every day, an injustice happens in business, in sports, on the tram. Relying on someone to sort it out is not enough. It is our duty to be there for others, speaking for others when they cannot. We affirm a world of peace. Every week we sing about let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. We have to start meaning it. It has to live here. It's not just the words, the songs, the prayers. It's the actions that we choose. It is time for us all to take ownership. Take ownership of your life. Take ownership of this community. Take ownership of this world. You are a child of God. It is up to you to determine what world you are inheriting, what life you are inheriting, and what world we leave for the next generation to inherit. That's all up to us. We make those choices. Through your faith, we are victorious. And we are overcoming. And so it is.
Let's take a minute. Close your eyes, if you're willing, if you're comfortable, or lower your gaze. Let's just take a deep breath in together. And release that. And another deep breath in and hold it just for a second. And release. One more deep breath in. And release. And let your breath occur naturally. In this moment, bring your mind to that truth. You are a part of the divine. You are whole. You are a child of God. You are a part of that one presence, that one power. Affirming that in your heart, I am a part of all that is. And in that energy, we affirm, I am peace. I am love. I have the wisdom. I have the strength. I have the desire to do what is mine to do all that I can. And I remind myself when I start to forget, I remind myself I am a child of God. I am a part of all that is. And I make a difference. And so it is.